What if I told you that stupidity isn't just about lacking intelligence, but is actually something darker? A force that can hijack brilliant minds and turn them into tools of destruction. What if the real danger to our civilization isn't evil people doing evil things, but regular folks who've simply stopped thinking? Imagine this. A top scientist with years of education begins spreading reckless, false claims. A kind-hearted teacher starts backing dangerous ideologies. A devoted parent starts making choices that put their own kids at risk. These aren't villains. They're intelligent, caring individuals caught in what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the grip of stupidity. And what makes it so chilling? It's not happening to other people. It's happening to people just like us. This isn't just some abstract theory. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran a disturbing obedience experiment at Yale. Regular people, guided by an authority figure, were told to deliver what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to another person. Even after hearing screams of pain, 65% kept going, believing they were delivering life-threatening shocks. These weren't monsters. They weren't broken. They were everyday people who momentarily gave up their ability to think morally for themselves. This is what Bonhoeffer saw up close in Nazi Germany, and it led him to a deeply unsettling conclusion about human behavior. But before we go further, ask yourself something. Have you ever gone along with something just because everyone else around you did? Keep that in mind, because what you're about to hear might be one of the most important psychological insights of our time. Bonhoeffer wasn't just a thinker locked in an academic tower. He was a German Lutheran pastor who watched his world crumble in front of him. Born in 1906 into a brilliant family, his father was a renowned psychiatrist. Bonhoeffer believed deeply in education and rational debate. But as the Nazi regime took control, something happened that shattered his belief in human reason. He watched in disbelief as the very people he admired, educated, refined, and devout, began embracing ideas and leaders that stood in direct opposition to everything they once held sacred. These weren't naive crowds tricked by propaganda. These were doctors, professors, religious leaders, people who willingly handed over their intellect to the regime. From prison in 1943, sentenced to die for trying to stop Hitler, Bonhoeffer penned his most haunting thought. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Arguments don't work. Force doesn't work. Reason is ignored. What made this insight so disturbing wasn't just where he was, it was how accurate he was. He pointed out something chilling. Evil often self-destructs. It sparks resistance. But stupidity? It thinks it's doing good. That's what makes it so hard to break. And that wasn't his only warning. Bonhoeffer realized something crucial. Stupidity serves power. People with bad intentions usually know they're doing harm, which creates internal conflict and eventually breaks them down. But those wrapped in functional stupidity truly believe they're doing the right thing, and they become immune to criticism. This isn't by accident. Modern power doesn't have to censor information. It just needs to create an environment where honest thinking becomes almost impossible. When Bonhoeffer spoke of stupidity, he wasn't talking about low IQ or a lack of schooling. He meant something deeper, what today we'd call willful ignorance or learned blindness. In a prison letter, he wrote, "The stubbornness of the stupid shouldn't fool us. They're not thinking for themselves. Talking with them feels like arguing with catchphrases, not people." Bonhoeffer's theory was groundbreaking because he wasn't blaming individuals. He was pointing to the systems that condition people to stop thinking. In truth, the world we live in encourages mental shortcuts. Social platforms make fortunes when we react with emotion instead of logic. News sites get more clicks from outrage than nuance. Politicians win hearts with slogans, not substance. When people are exhausted, juggling jobs, drowning in debt, and overloaded with data, surrendering their intellect becomes a coping mechanism. Economists even have a term for it: rational ignorance. Basically, it's more efficient to stay uninformed than to dig through complex issues. But when everyone does that, the result isn't just individual ignorance. It becomes collective madness. Exactly what Bonhoeffer witnessed. And while society pushes us toward these shortcuts, our minds are wired to give in. Leon Festinger's research in the 1950s on cognitive dissonance showed that when people face facts that clash with their beliefs, their brains fight back. Bonhoeffer already understood this decades earlier. And modern psychology confirms, the more stressed and insecure we are, the harder it becomes to accept uncomfortable truths. Exactly the environment our modern world creates. Bonhoeffer also noticed something most people overlook: Stupidity often shows up in groups. He wrote that stupidity isn't just a mental flaw, it's a social phenomenon. He saw how smart individuals, when part of a crowd or a cause, could lose their ability to think critically, and that insight was years ahead of its time. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch proved Bonhoeffer right. He found that when people are surrounded by a group giving obviously wrong answers, 75% will go along with the group at least once, even when they know it's wrong. Now imagine this happening online. Today's algorithms are like turbocharged conformity machines. They build echo chambers so powerful that it becomes nearly impossible to think independently. In 2018, MIT researchers uncovered something shocking. False information spreads 6 times faster than truth on social media. Why? Because lies often feel better. They're easier to digest, more emotionally satisfying. They confirm what we already believe. When someone shares misinformation that aligns with their worldview, they get rewarded with likes, shares, and validation. The algorithm sees this and serves them more of the same. And before they know it, they're trapped in a self-reinforcing loop, an intellectual quicksand that feels like certainty but buries them in illusion. Ever scrolled through your feed and felt like it's reading your mind? That's not a coincidence. It's a system designed to keep you comfortable, by feeding you exactly what you want to see. It's not just technology, it's engineered ignorance. And we've seen this movie before. The Salem witch trials weren't led by monsters. They were led by concerned neighbors who genuinely believed they were saving their community. The Red Scare of the 1950s? Same story. It wasn't villains. It was patriotic Americans who truly thought they were defending democracy. In each case, educated people ignored logic, abandoned critical thinking, and chose emotional certainty over complexity. So now we have to ask, if the world is built to work against our minds, how do we fight back? Bonhoeffer believed the answer was something he called costly grace, a rare and uncomfortable kind of courage. It means choosing to think for yourself even when it hurts, even when it's dangerous, even when you stand alone. But today, the battle is even harder. We're not just up against social pressure. We're up against evolution and trillion-dollar systems that are laser-focused on exploiting our mental shortcuts. Our brains were shaped by survival, not truth. Psychologists call this intellectual humility, the ability to admit you don't know everything, to recognize that your beliefs might be flawed, to question even when it's hard. Here are a few ways to train that mindset. First, create intellectual friction. Each week, read or watch something that challenges your perspective, not to change your mind, but to stress test your views. Second, practice productive doubt. If you're totally sure of something, ask yourself, what would make me change my mind? If you can't answer, that's a red flag. Third, pause before you post. Take 60 seconds to verify what you're about to share. That tiny pause breaks the feedback loop the algorithm depends on. And finally, learn to say, I don't know. It's one of the most powerful things you can do. In a world that rewards fake certainty, honest doubt is revolutionary. But here's the truth. Even if we master these habits, personal effort isn't enough. We need systems that make thinking easier, not harder. That means requiring tech companies to be transparent about how their algorithms influence what we see. It means teaching people, starting from childhood, how to evaluate sources and evidence. It means designing digital spaces that reward honesty over tribal loyalty. And most importantly, it means creating economic policies that reduce stress and uncertainty. Because when people aren't drowning in fear about rent, healthcare, or job security, they have the space to think deeply and clearly. Bonhoeffer's theory was powerful in his time, but there's one thing he couldn't have predicted. This isn't just about propaganda anymore. It's about the way our minds are wired. Our brains weren't built for truth. They were built for survival. Bonhoeffer lived in a time where Nazi propaganda spread through newspapers and radio. That was dangerous. But what we're facing now is on a whole different scale. We've gone from government messaging to hyper-personalized social media feeds that know exactly how to manipulate us. And now we're stepping into the era of AI-generated deep fakes, where even reality can be faked with terrifying accuracy. This isn't just about more lies. It's about attacking the very mechanisms of human cognition. Our minds are naturally wired to value speed over depth, to trust familiar voices over new ones, to seek out information that confirms what we already believe. In the wild, those instincts helped us make fast decisions that kept us alive. But in today's world, they're being used against us. And here's what's truly frightening. No one is immune. Not intelligence, not education, not good intentions. Even the smartest among us are vulnerable when under pressure. That's exactly what Bonhoeffer described. When people feel uncertain or threatened, they start looking for simple explanations that make them feel safe. Authoritative voices offering black and white answers become irresistible. And the more chaotic the world feels, the more people cling to those voices, even when they're wrong. But now those voices aren't just human. They're engineered. We're no longer dealing with propaganda from politicians. We're facing algorithms and AI systems trained to exploit our deepest cognitive flaws with surgical precision. Every scroll, every pause, every click or emotional reaction, it's all being tracked, analyzed, and turned into a weapon against independent thought. We watched this happen during the COVID-19 pandemic. Highly educated professionals, doctors, engineers, lawyers, began promoting baseless claims about treatments and vaccines. These weren't failures of logic or IQ. They were the result of immense psychological pressure and a system that rewarded conformity over critical thinking. Bonhoeffer understood the cost of refusing to surrender your mind. He paid with his life. On April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany surrendered, Bonhoeffer was executed by hanging. His final words, reported by a fellow prisoner, were, "This is the end, for me, the beginning of life." His death wasn't just an act of resistance against tyranny. It was a stand for the importance of thought itself. Bonhoeffer knew something we often forget. When we give up thinking for ourselves, we give up our humanity. In his words, we become puppets, pulled by the strings of whoever happens to be strongest at the moment. And that leads us to the question that haunted Bonhoeffer, and should haunt us too. Who stands firm? When pressure to conform is everywhere, when thinking differently feels dangerous, when lies are easier to swallow than truth, who stands firm? It's not the most intelligent or the most educated. It's the ones who choose, every single day, to be curious instead of certain, honest instead of comfortable, thoughtful instead of reactive. That's not some grand act of heroism. It's a small, quiet rebellion that becomes extraordinary, especially when the world around you has stopped doing it. The tragedy is that giving up your intellect often feels liberating. Thinking is hard. It hurts to hold two conflicting ideas in your mind. It's uncomfortable to admit you might be wrong. It's scary to question what everyone else seems to accept. But Bonhoeffer believed that discomfort is the very price of being human. And in a society that profits from our surrender, the choice to think for yourself becomes an act of rebellion. And here's the hardest truth of all. We're all vulnerable to functional stupidity. The moment we believe we're above it, immune to manipulation, we're already halfway gone. Because the price of staying intellectually free isn't comfort. It's vigilance. Not just against external enemies or misinformation, but against our own inner tendency to shut down when things get complicated. Bonhoeffer's theory unsettles us because it hits too close to home. We see it all around us. Smart people defending obviously false beliefs. Well-educated individuals making decisions that cause harm. Good citizens supporting policies that violate their own values. The problem isn't that we're getting less intelligent. The problem is that we live in a system that rewards speed, certainty, and emotional simplicity, while punishing deep thought and intellectual honesty. But within that sobering reality lies a spark of hope. Because if stupidity is something we slip into, it's also something we can wake up from. If it's reinforced by structures, those structures can be redesigned. If it's a response to mental overload, we can create lives that allow space for reflection. Think of critical thinking like physical fitness. It's uncomfortable at first, but absolutely essential for strength. No one expects to run a marathon without training. So why do we expect to navigate a flood of complex, emotionally charged information without practicing how to think clearly? Like muscles, our minds weaken when we don't use them. So next time you feel completely sure about something, next time you find yourself brushing off facts that contradict your beliefs, next time it feels good to be right, pause. That moment of comfort is often where functional stupidity begins. And Bonhoeffer warned us, it never shows up loudly. It creeps in quietly, whispering, "You already know enough, you don't need to think more." And when you hear that voice, you have a choice. Do you give in to the comfort of certainty? Or do you push through and reclaim your ability to think? Because Bonhoeffer didn't ask whether we're smart enough to resist stupidity. He asked if we're brave enough to keep thinking when thinking becomes hard. That's the question we all have to answer. In a world that profits from our passivity, choosing to slow down, ask hard questions, and think independently might just be the most powerful thing we can do. So here's your challenge this week. Pick one belief you feel strongly about, anything. Then spend 30 minutes reading or listening to the best arguments against it. Not to torture yourself, not to fall into doubt, but to develop the kind of mental courage Bonhoeffer died defending. If your belief survives the test, you'll hold it with more clarity. And if it doesn't, you'll have gained something far more valuable than comfort, truth. Because the future of human dignity doesn't depend on how much we know. It depends on how willing we are to keep thinking, especially when it's inconvenient. And if this video made you question something you thought you were sure about, that's not a weakness. That's the beginning of strength. Share this with someone who isn't afraid to go deep, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because in a world built to keep us distracted, the simple act of thinking might be the boldest resistance we have left. And if you take away just one idea today, let it be this. Every time you choose curiosity over certainty, facts over feelings, thoughtfulness over impulse, you're not just protecting your mind, you're protecting the very possibility of wisdom. In an age drowning in artificial stupidity. So, what's one belief you're willing to question this week? Tell me in the comments. And let's be the ones who still stand tall, even when everyone else has stopped thinking.